Hello and welcome to Shiloh Christian Academy's free parent workshop on how to raise a reader, supporting your young child with reading. My name is Latoya Hart. I am the teacher. My name is Latoya Hart. I am the teacher for Shiloh Christian Academy. I'm also a wife and a mother. And so today I'm excited to share with you some information that I've learned, as well as experience that I've had firsthand in and out of the classroom. My children are school age, as well as children that are not yet school age. And the children that I've worked with within the context of the classroom have been children in the general ed setting, as well as special needs populations, such as children with multiple disabilities and with hearing loss. And so the breadth of my knowledge really gives me a great opportunity to speak to reading and really developing strong readers that come from diverse backgrounds. And so I have your child in mind as I introduce and unearth this information today. Now, I want to give you a little bit of a forewarning before we jump into today's presentation. Uh, I imagine that the principles and the approach that we will discuss today will be a departure from what you may have heard before, what you may have read in textbooks, and in fact, what you may see in some classrooms. And so, just keep an open mind, be ready to challenge some big ideas that you have about the best approach to reading. In a world where truth is often made to seem relative, which we know it's not, it's absolute, we understand that there's one truth, right? And his name is Jesus Christ. And in the same manner, we can use this as a worldview to understand that there's a right and a wrong. And so as we navigate our world, I want to apply that specifically to what we're discussing today. I want us to consider that with the wealth of information that there is out there on reading, that there is a right and a wrong approach to reading, and there's a way that you can foster and accelerate the development of your child in language and really boost their reading progress when you do it the right way. And so, without further ado, I'd like to jump right in. Just give me a moment to share my screen. And if you have any questions over the course of the presentation and you're with us via Facebook or YouTube Live, I'm going to encourage you to please leave your questions in the chat. And there will be a question and answer period toward the end of the presentation. And we'll try to cover those questions that speak to a wide audience. We're going to encourage you at the end to please join our Facebook page where you can feel free to message us with more personal and tailored questions, perhaps reflecting your unique circumstance or the needs of your child. So just be mindful throughout. The parking lot is in the chat, in YouTube and Facebook. Unlike speaking, reading is a skill that does not typically develop spontaneously. So what that means is your child will learn to speak often from incidental knowledge. So, as long as you speak to your child and you give them rich language experiences, you expose them to multiple speakers. Perhaps you engage in multimodal communication with your child. If you're fluent in more than one language, such as English and Spanish, you may speak to your child in English and Spanish interchangeably from birth. Giving them your native language as well as your second language. And research has proven that when children have this great exposure to language, from an early age, they're able to pick up multiple languages. You also expose your child to different audiences and different environments. Well, reading is quite different. Reading does not develop spontaneously. And this is the first idea that I want us to understand. Just because we give our children a rich text environment, perhaps we have labels all over our home, which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And we even have visual aids to go along with those labels. It does not mean that our child will grow up to be a great reader. Even if we expose our children to diverse texts, perhaps besides reading books, you also expose your child to informational text, National Geographic, magazines, maps. These are some of the things that I do with my own children. Nevertheless, it does not mean that your child will excel in reading, because in order for a child to excel in reading, it is very important that we give them systematic and intentional instruction in reading. I'm going to say that again. In order for our children to be strong readers and for us to foster and cultivate that strength, it is very important that instruction is both systematic and intentional as opposed to incidental. So this is what we're going to be exploring today, and I'm going to try to take my time as I walk through this process. The key to understanding how reading skill develops is understanding how beginners learn to recognize written words accurately and automatically. So here we have our beginning reader in mind, and the words accurately and automatically speaks to a child's ability to be able to decode a word. You'll hear that as you do your own research in phonics instruction. You want your child to be able to identify a word correctly and immediately. And this will lead them as they mature to being able to comprehend text. But before comprehension, we have to have word recognition. And so that's pretty much what this quote is explaining. Now, I want to take a moment and pause because this presentation is for the young reader. However, we're not going to spend much time speaking to the infant. So I want to take a moment and do it here before we go a step further. And I think that this will help to set framework for us understanding the information that we're going to receive today. Okay, so get ready for big idea number 2 as you listen to this scenario and imagine with me for a moment. Let's think about the way children learn to read. Let's get an infant in mind, okay? Perhaps think back to when your child was an infant. Your child is sitting, let's say, in the living room, and all of a sudden, a fire engine whizzes down the street and they hear that siren, okay? Or perhaps the doorbell just rang. Your child will automatically begin to attend to that sound. That means they'll lean in. They'll lean in and attempt to discern what was the sound that they heard and what does it mean. Okay, and I'm talking about a normal or a child with normal hearing. They're naturally gonna attend. And this is one of the first skills that we see our child learning to attend to sound. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that one of the first relationships that children make is to sound. And while it might sound quite obvious, in fact, it's not, because as I talked about that textbook information and what we may observe and view in classrooms, when we talk about phonics instruction, we often hear that children make letter sound correspondences, right? Or letter sound associations. But if we think about a way that the child actually learns to read naturally and organically, It's not by letter sound association, it's by sound to letter association. And this is very important. In fact, it's why mothers and fathers are encouraged to speak to their child while they're in the womb, right? Because that child, even in the womb, is beginning to make meaning of sound. And this is going to be very important as the child continues to grow to undergird their development of learning to read. It's that sound relationship. And so, in this way, I still have that infant in mind, guys. I want to talk a little bit about what I found out in the classroom and what I found out at home. As a teacher of the deaf, I was able to witness how beneficial it was for children with normal hearing and children who have varying degrees of deafness to use sign language at an early age. And so, from what I witnessed, I decided to try it with my own child. So, my first child, I didn't speak to her through sign language from birth, but at about 6 months, I began to sign everything that I said on my lips. And I was able to do it because it's my second language. But we know that baby sign language is something that's become very popular in recent years. In fact, it almost seems trendy. But I want to let you guys know it's not just a passing trend. There is research and evidence that backs up this approach. And I believe it's, in fact, the first step in putting your child on the path to success in reading is employing sign language. Because when you use sign language, you give your child a conceptual framework for sound. I'm going to say that again. When you use sign language with your child, and it doesn't just have to be your infant, this could be your toddler, or in fact, your preschooler or kindergartner, so forth and so on. You're giving your child a conceptual framework for sound. So, for example, this happened to me. Perhaps, your infant is hungry and they begin to fuss, right? And it could be because they want milk, or perhaps they're wet or their diaper is soiled. So you say to that child, milk, and they hear it, milk. And then you sign the word milk with them, milk. And then you go and you get the milk. It doesn't matter if it's in a bottle or you're nursing. You get the milk and you give it to the child. And then the light bulb turns on for that infant and they understand the extent of meaning that sound carries. And when you do this at a very early age, ideally with an infant, then they form this relationship early on. So what it will do is it'll accelerate their language development and their reading progress, okay? And I found this to be true with my own child. In comparison to her same age hearing peers, she advanced quite quickly. And I think it's because she was able to make connections between sound and letter because she had that conceptual framework early on. And so I just want to say that as we go forward, and unfortunately, this particular presentation isn't going to speak any more to that, but perhaps in the future, we'll offer a presentation that can jump right in to sign language and how can you can utilize that to boost your child's reading progress. The big takeaway from this particular information that I just gave is for us to remember that children form sound to letter correspondences or associations, not letter to sound associations. And this is the first principle in true phonics instruction. Okay, so now you're going to hear what sounds like a lot of scientific jargon, but don't worry, I'm going to make sense of it. I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to make sense of it together. So children naturally move through 4 phases as they learn to read. The first phase is called the pre-alphabetic phase, in which children recognize words in their environment. They know that they have a distinctive shape, but do not pay attention to the individual letters. Okay, that's the pre-alphabetic phase. The next phase is called partial alphabetic, and this is when children know a few letters, mostly consonants, okay? They'll know a few letters and sounds, and they'll use them to predict words. So they'll start to make not so much direct letter to sound associations, but letter to whole word associations. And this is typified usually by invented spellings where we see children leave out those vowel sounds and in fact use only consonants, okay? So now the next phase that the child is going to move to is the full alphabetic phase. And that's when children know all the major, and there you go, you see that language, letter sound correspondences, and are able to blend and segment all of the phonemes and graphemes in a word. This is also when they're beginning to build a sight word vocabulary. So let's take a moment to define terms because I'm aware that everyone in the room is not an educator and we have some kind of elaborate words here. So let me simplify it for you. When it says blend and segment phonemes and graphemes, the phoneme is the sound that the letter makes, okay? And the grapheme is the letter itself. So you see here kind of there's a role reversal that's talked about as we make mention to the full alphabetic principle. This harkens back to the information that I just gave you, that children are in fact making those sound to letter correspondences and not the other way around, okay? All right, now the last phase is when children are able to blend whole words and parts of words using these same properties, okay, by grouping them into chunks or units of information and retain them as sight words in the form of unique letter strings. So we know that especially in English, there are a number of spelling rules and a number of spelling patterns. So that's why systematic instruction in phonics is often taught alongside other methodologies. So, I'm a proponent of sight words, especially to get our children used to seeing irregular spelling patterns and also continuing to decode with confidence. So we do want to use sight words, but we also want to give them systematic instruction in phonics that makes sense. And I'm going to talk to you about what I mean by makes sense. So now that we've gotten through this lengthy slide, let's make sense of what we just read. Okay, so here we go. That very first phase, the pre-alphabetic phase, begins as early as 2 years. And remember, we talked about how in this phase, the child recognizes that letters have a distinctive shape, but don't pay attention much to them. So you might be riding down the highway, as I'm sure is common, and pass McDonald's, and your child seemingly knows how to read that sign almost immediately, right? Oh, there's McDonald's, but they're not in fact reading the word. They're recognizing the golden arches. Or if you have a son or daughter that loves to play with Legos, they will recognize that trademark almost instantaneously, but it's not because they have decoded the word, correct? So now in the next phase, we talked about the associations that children make between sound and letter. And so here we see the letter P. They may know that P makes the p sound. And because they know that P makes the p sound, they'll say, oh, P, puppy. This happens along the preschool age when you see children making these associations. And as I mentioned already, it's often with consonants. So this is partial alphabetic because they have some knowledge of sound to letter correspondences, but not a full knowledge. So that takes us to full alphabetic. And by the end of kindergarten, we reasonably expect that children will know all of the sound to letter correspondences. So now they're being able to segment and blend words, begin that first try at segmenting and blending, such as in the word cat. They will be able to say those sounds, blend those sounds, and produce that word. That work begins normally around kindergarten age. And you can keep your child in mind to see where they are in their development of the alphabetic principle. Where are they in moving through these phases? And then the final stage is consolidated alphabetic, when your child has reached a level of mastery. So here you see that your child is able to articulate and understand the beginning of words, such as the 3-letter beginning in the word splash, right? They will understand how to pronounce that sound, pull, and put it together with the second part of the word ash to make the word splash. And this can begin as early as grade 1. Now remember, I know I'm talking pretty quickly, so if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. And I do want to address those burning questions at the end of our presentation. So let's move on. Okay, so now we're going to get into the third principle, I believe, that I've introduced thus far. And this talks about how do we teach our young child to read, okay? How do we teach our young child to read? It's not guesswork. The hallmark of skilled reading is fast, context-free word identification and rich, context-dependent text understanding. So there you go. It sounds like a lot, but it's really not. All it's talking about is the relationship between identification and comprehension. Word identification, as I said already, precedes comprehension. So in our young child, we want to get them to fast, context-free identification. That way they'll be able later on as they grow and move up through third, fourth grade, etc., even as young as second grade, they'll be able to make meaning of the text before them. Here's the right way, and these are the gems and jewels that I'm introducing. Give attention to the bullets on the right. We want to introduce single letter sounds first and then progress to 2 and 3 letters. Okay, so this will be relatively familiar to most of us, right? Because we have learned to teach our child letters in alphabetical order. But I actually want to put that to bed in a sense. Not saying that you throw out the baby with the bathwater. You can still sing the ABC song, but understand unless we give our child systematic, intentional instruction in phonics, right? When they sing that ABC song, LMNOP is going to be one letter because that's what they heard. And so in systematic synthetic phonics, and I want you to write that down somewhere for you to look up a little later on. But systematic synthetic phonics, in the systematic synthetic phonics approach, sounds are not taught in alphabetical order, okay? And there's a reason for that, but they are introduced as single letters first, okay? So remember, I'm going to continue to say this throughout the presentation to kind of get us away from what we've been familiar with all along. We're really teaching sounds, not so much letters. So we're teaching our children sound and then the letter association, okay? And this is really important. And we do start with single letters first, but not in alphabetical order. All right, so we start with those single letter sounds such as s, s for snake, or as in ant, okay, or t for tennis. We begin with a small set of letters that can be combined to make vowel consonant and consonant vowel consonant words. Okay, so what does that mean? In that first 3 set of letters that I just said orally, S, A, and T, we can make a couple combinations. Now, this is what I would encourage you to do, as I've done it as well and experienced success. You could start with as small a unit as one single letter, right? Because we can teach a child that a single letter can carry meaning, such as the letter A. It's a word all by itself. So just in those first 3 sounds, s, a, and t, the child has knowledge of one word. So you can start with just a vowel, then progress to a vowel consonant combination, such as at. And then as your child gains mastery of vowel consonant combinations, you can lengthen the experience to consonant vowel consonant combinations, as I said already, in s, at. Okay? So we're introducing letters at a rate of about 3 to 6 letters a week, and this depends on your child. you want to consider your child right where they are. If they can handle as many as 6 letters a week, then that's as many as we would introduce. And if not, perhaps you would teach them 6 letters over the course of 2 weeks, 3 letters at a time. All right? Now, here's the biggie. In systematic synthetic phonics, high frequency letters are taught first. High frequency letters are taught first. So let me help you make sense of that. The first 6 sounds that are commonly taught are s, a, t, p, I, n. Okay? That is, and the letters that correspond to that are as follows: SATPIN. Now, just by hearing those sounds and letters, I bet you can think of many words that you are able to make. Now, let's compare that to teaching your child letter sound correspondences in alphabetical order. If we look at the first 6 letters of the alphabet and their sounds, we have A, B, K, D, G. How many words can we make with those 6 letters, right? So when we start with the high frequency letters first, the letters that children most commonly see as they are exposed to text, the sounds that they most commonly hear as you speak to them and as they listen to other people speak, then we arm them with the ability to learn at a faster rate. So that's why in this particular approach, high frequency letters are taught first. And it just makes sense, right? It should just make plain sense. And I mean, I sit back and wonder, because it seems so obvious, how come, this was not my experience and it may not have been yours when you were taught to read? But that's okay, because now that we know better, we can do better. Now, in this approach, also, we separate the teaching of visually and auditorily similar letters. So I've dealt with this with my parents as a teacher in the classroom, and even with my own young child. When she was in about pre-K 4, about pre-K 4, it was common for her to make letter reversals, okay? So for example, it's commonplace for a child to confuse letters that look the same. And because of that, they will sometimes confuse those sounds. So letters like B and D, we see children write kind of irrespective of one another. The same thing with G and P, N and M. So in the synthetic phonics approach, we teach those letters separately. So as I said, that first set of 6 letters, and I'm gonna bring up a slide later. I don't expect you to really remember all of this, but that first group of letters that you would introduce to your child as they're learning to read would be SATPIN in some particular order. Now we see that N is in that first group, right? So that means M is going to be in another group. And we do that so that we don't confuse our children. We anticipate those misconceptions that they may make, and we want to help them. Okay, so now time for a little practice. All right. This activity is an activity that you can do with your child, okay? So this is very important. This is a listening activity. Although on the screen you can see the word that we're going to blend and segment, when you do this with your child, it would be a listening activity. In other words, they wouldn't have access to the word visually. So the very first step is to say the word. So you would say cat. Then you would stretch the word. At. Then you would encourage your child to count the sounds that they heard. K, at. 3 sounds. Cat. And then they would represent each sound with a letter. So do you remember when I said sound precedes letter? Learning of sounds precedes learning of letters. So you can kind of see that And you can infer that from this activity because your child heard the sound and now they're going to represent the sound with the letter. So that fourth step is for them to represent each sound that they heard with the letter. And then they'll look at it and say, that looks right, cat. Now, you could do the same among that first group of letters that you introduce with your child, right? Instead of cat, this could be an activity with the word sat, all right? And this activity you could use all throughout as you move your child from vowel consonant combinations to consonant vowel consonant combinations. And it's a lot of fun. Perhaps while I'm here, I'll talk about a little bit. There's many different ways to do this. If you have a child that's a kinesthetic learner, which means they like to get involved in some movement, and you have a whiteboard, doesn't matter if it's a child-sized whiteboard or a full-scale whiteboard, you could even take magnets, and where you see the dots underneath cat in step 3, you could move a magnet up for each particular phoneme. Okay, so you could get some movement going on. You could do this with blocks. If you have a child, boy or girl, who likes cars, you could tape a little paper on top, similar to like a Post-it note with each letter on it, and have them drive the car up to the particular phoneme and grapheme representation. There are many different ways to do it, so get creative and think about how your child likes to learn. All right, so now, while the principles that I've talked about thus far are departure from the traditional approach, right? The strategies may sound the same. So this is kind of a place where you can get comfortable and start to feel confident as a parent and as an educator. As a parent, you are your child's first educator. So now we're going to employ some strategies that you've heard before. But as we employ them, let's keep in mind that we're doing those main things. We're making sure that we're introducing to our children those high frequency sounds and letters first, right? We're introducing letters at a rate of about 3 to 6 a week, right? And we're keeping them in an order that would naturally encourage our child to progress from consonant to vowel consonant to consonant vowel consonant combination. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so this we already know. You want to talk often with your child to build listening and talking skills. So we want to give our child rich language experiences. And I did talk about that earlier as a way to encourage speech in your young child. But I believe that the very first thing that a child learns to do is to listen. Okay, and so when you talk with your child, as you eat together at breakfast, as you're outside in the yard or on the walk to school or even wait for the bus, they're learning to listen, and they're learning the significance and the relevance that sound has. So I have some examples here. If you could just turn your attention to where it says parent talk, these examples are contextual. So that means if I'm outside, maybe I'm waiting on the bus and the neighbor's dog comes on over. And, my daughter is able to pet him and my young son is able to interact with him. And then he goes back to the neighbor's yard. I can ask my child, why didn't the dog just run away? This is true for me as well. My daughter had a friend who she goes to school with who lives in our subdivision. So I can ask her, where did the boy live? Okay. And imagine your child just had a dream and you can involve them in the details of that dream. Well, what kind of eyes did the creature have? You'll notice something about these questions. They are the WH questions, right? Who, what, why, when, and where. These questions follow a pattern. And these kinds of questions really foster listening in our child, which is a precursor in learning to read, because they'll be listening to you as the speaker, but then later they'll be listening to the text. Okay, next strategy, focus your child's attention on the sounds of spoken language. Again, doesn't sound particularly new, but very important. Now, read to your child often. This is something that we know is important, but when we think about this, when we imagine this, oftentimes it's easy for us to imagine sitting down with our child with a book. Perhaps you begin the day in a Bible study devotion, or you end with reading at night. But when we say read to your child often, it's important that we encourage our child to make meaning of text wherever they find it, right? So we want to call their attention to labels. Perhaps you're in the kitchen cooking and you could read to your child the recipe. You can even give them the box and encourage them to read the recipe back to you, because I find that oftentimes now there's enough visual aids there to kind of get you through the steps of that recipe. So you're reading to your young child and they're reading to you, quote unquote, pointing out labels, highlighting signs. I spoke to a friend of mine and she told me about, it was commonplace that she was young and she was in those long car drives, to look at the street signs and attempt to make meaning of them. And this is really important too, because we know that text is a symbol for sound. And so when we start to explore that with our child by looking at street signs, then they kind of begin to expand their conceptual framework for sound to include symbols, right? Okay. Now, we want to sing or say nursery rhymes and songs to our child. That's why I said you don't have to forget about the ABC song altogether. But as I talk here, I want to encourage you to go a step beyond. Now, my oldest child is a songstress, right? So when it came to developing our schedule together, I felt the best way for her to internalize it would be to sing it. And so when we're talking about singing and saying nursery rhymes and songs, it's not just as it relates to teaching your child the alphabet, but it can also relate to them learning concepts of time. Or even if you have a child that's a little bit older, you can expose them to spelling patterns and rules. So I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna do a little singing and give you an example. So our schedule goes, God, you are first, then breakfast, schoolwork, lunch and recess, then it's homework, dinner, now it's time for bed, and we start all over again. Now, why I sung that, and I hope that wasn't too harsh on your ears, is because though I was singing this for the direct benefit of my 6-year-old so that she would know her schedule at home as we learn together, I found that my 2-year-old was singing the song more often. And so it was really impactful for her, because while she's just yet exploring the relationship between day and night, right? She doesn't necessarily know when yesterday was and when tomorrow will be. She began to understand time through that schedule that Dara and I sung together. And this is my 2-year-old, and I believe she was doing this like even a little before she was 2. So when we're talking about singing to our children, we're not talking only about nursery rhymes, or we're not limiting the language interaction to when we're teaching them about sound letter correspondences, but this actually applies across subject areas. Okay, and then you want to play word games, as I alluded to already. And here's an example of that. How many words can you rhyme with fox, with bill? And then finally, have your child identify and name letters of the alphabet as they are introduced. So there that is again, as they are introduced. So your child can even make a letter book, right? So let's say you're introducing the letters of their name, which is often one of the first sound to letter associations that children make, as we want them to learn how to read and write their name. You could begin with that initial consonant or vowel in their name and write that, or have them cut the letter out of a magazine or another print source, and then have a photo of them above and teach them Dara. D is for Dara. And then you see other examples, so forth and so on. Okay. So now I'm not going to spend too much on here on this particular slide and the next one, but I just want to let you know that I wasn't going to leave you out there. I'm going to give you two sheets, okay? And this slide is just kind of a mirror to the PDF that I'm going to be sending to you as a thank you for your participation today and kind of encouraging you to hit the ground running when it comes to teaching your young child to read. And what it has the order of those high frequency sounds that I talked about. And as you can see, they're grouped into sets of 6 sounds at a time. Okay, so just everything that we talked about, you kind of see here. And then these are the groups in their sequential order. And the guidance is on the left. Everything that I said already. And I will be emailing this to you guys. Now, this is a sound chart, okay? And it takes you through the sounds that are high frequency sounds, right? From beginning to end. So you move from left to right through this sound chart. And there's an image, and there's also movements that you can do to encourage your child to gain mastery of that sound and letter. I got this sound chart from Jolly Phonics, and I want to throw that out there. Feel free to type that into your search engine, Jolly Phonics, because they have a lot of reproducibles. And also check it out on YouTube too, because they have a lot of YouTube videos that are a lot of fun that kind of take you through what it means to teach synthetic phonics. So I talked about those sounds, snake. And when you make that sound, you could say to your child, imagine a snake slithering through the grass, right? I'm going to skip over to T. I talked about the sound and you could say to your child, imagine a tennis game and that tennis ball hitting the tennis racket. And you could swing your tennis racket as you pronounce that sound. So forth and so on. But again, check out YouTube, just Google Jolly Phonics, and there are a host of videos that'll take you through the sounds and the motions for each of these phonemes and graphemes. Okay, so now it's time for questions and answers. We'll take as many as we're able in the time that's allotted. Give me a moment. I just want to come out of my slideshow presentation. Okay. So first question, how early should you start teaching vowel consonant and consonant vowel consonant combinations? Excellent question, guys. Excellent question. I would say as early as your child is ready. Now, I did talk about how instruction is systematic and intentional, yes. However, I have a 2-year-old, and I would begin to teach first the vowel. As I said, I might start with A, right? Because that's one of those high frequency sounds that she's going to hear and see often. So I may start with A. It just happens to be the first letter in the alphabet, but it is a word that stands alone all on its own. So I would expose her to that sound, and then I would expose her to the letter, right? So that she has the letter sound correspondence. And then we would broaden the experience to a vowel consonant combination after. So I might go from a, apple. And then I may say, a lion jumped through a fiery hoop in the circus. A. And then we'll move to pairing that sound with the next sound that follows, T. Okay, and so you would progress. And I said, begin as early as you believe that the child is ready. There's no necessarily right or wrong age because we know that all children follow a unique path of development, right? And they all have their own learning curve. Okay, let's see. I'm looking for any other questions. Let's see. Okay, well, we're almost out of time, but I do want to thank you so very much for your participation. let me just do a little bit of review, okay? Let me just do a little bit of review here. So first things first, as we said, it's very important that we understand that the first relationship that our child builds is to sound, okay? Not to letter, but to sound. And that's how they come out of the womb, knowing mommy's voice and knowing daddy's voice, right? Very important, all right? And then as we explore what that means, we understand when we're teaching them phonics, we are making sound to letter correspondences. And this doesn't happen incidentally, okay? Doesn't happen all on its own as speech develops. This is something that we have to craft and structure for our children through synthetic phonics approach, which means that we introduce those words not in alphabetical order, but according to high frequency sounds. So just a little bit of a review before I close out. And remember, I will be sending you those 2 one-pagers to help you get started with your child. Now, once again, thank you so much for coming. I hope you found this beneficial. I'm going to encourage you to please reach out to us via Shiloh Christian Academy, Atlanta, via email. You can email us those questions that you might have particular to you, info@shilohchristiansaints.org. And then also you can reach us via our website. And our website is www.shilohchristiansaints.org. Now, if you like what you heard over the course of this presentation, I want to let you know that beginning Monday, June 7th, we'll be starting an intensive phonics boot camp where I will actually be modeling the strategies that I talked about using the systematic synthetic phonics approach, okay? So I'll be modeling these strategies and others that pertain to children as early as 2 years old up to rising third graders. So if you enjoyed this, and if you feel, in fact, that your child could benefit from these approaches, I'm going to encourage you to head over to that website that I talked about, www.shilohchristiansaints.org. And then you'll see from our homepage that you can click on our workshops. And the first one to be offered is on Monday, June 7th at 5 p.m. Okay. And it's a 4-week boot camp with me. And I'll be modeling all these strategies. And so I hope that you'll join me there. Thank you again.